All right, everybody. I think we're gonna get started. Thanks everyone for coming. Excited to dive into everyone's favorite topic, regulation for Bitcoin. So I think I do want to just also kind of take the pulse of the crowd. Lots of different types of people here, practitioners. I'm just curious, people in your day-to-day working with clients or partners in the industry, how often do you still run? Who here still runs into the sort of response that Bitcoin is unregulated? Okay, so not as common. And then who here feels kind of positive about the direction regulation's going for Bitcoin? And who's concerned? Okay, cool. Yeah, yeah, mixed. Okay. Great. Okay. So, there's obviously been a lot of hype on the regulatory front the last year or so. So we're going to dive into that. Just plan for the panel. I'll try to we'll do quick intros and try to set this baseline where we're at, dive into some tactical stuff. And then we want to leave a lot of time for questions because this can be very applied. I know people have different backgrounds and businesses where there may be relevant stuff we can answer. So, sound like a plan? Cool. I'm Vijay Vesnaver. I'm an operating partner at Epoch. My background's in kind of a mix of strategy and operations, but I also went to law school, so I'm a legal nerd, and we'll try to, get some good stuff out of the people who actually know what's going on here. So let's just do a couple quick intros so people have the context and backgrounds, and then we'll dive in.
Sure. Hi, I'm Dan Carmen. I'm in Lexington, Kentucky. By trade, for the past 20 years, I've been a criminal defense attorney. Defended people accused of all kinds of misdeeds, including various financial misdeeds. For the past 8 years or so, I've helped people and families and companies with their Bitcoin-related problems. So I've done that consulting work and just opened a fund recently, which is very simple. It just holds people's Bitcoin for a long time and doesn't give it back to them for a long time. So. And so that's me. Go ahead.
All right, Colin Crossman. I'm not the Secretary of State for Wyoming. I'm the incoming Deputy Secretary of State. But today I'm the Director of the Business Division. As soon as the feds reopen, I get to be the deputy. But long story there. Thanks. In that role, I basically am the chief regulator for securities and businesses in Wyoming. In addition, I'm a Bitcoin miner. I've been in the space a lot longer than I've been a government employee, thankfully. And I'm also an attorney, so.
I'm Chris Lane. I'm the former Chief Technology Officer for Silvergate Bank. I spent 13 years there scaling deposit operations and payments, and spent the past 2 years basically biding my time waiting for banks to be interested in talking about digital assets. And actually, it was fun seeing Philadelphia City Center on the screen in the last presentation. I was actually there when I met Dan and Colin last week. I was on a call with them prepping for this panel, and I was there in Philadelphia City Center to talk to 200 bankers. I had 2 minutes to explain the difference between tokenized deposits and stablecoins to a room full of people that didn't really understand either. And when I would meet them, before, and after the presentation, I would say, I'm here to talk to you guys about tokenized deposits and stablecoins because you're not ready to talk about Bitcoin yet. So I'll be back in 4 years when you're ready to talk about Bitcoin. So.
Awesome. That kind of answers partially my first question, Chris, but I wanted to throw it to you to sort of, baseline us. There's been a lot of hype and hopium. From your perspective, having probably more scars than most in dealing with the regulators, are we tired of winning or are we fearful? What's the current status?
So I alluded to it a few minutes ago. I'm optimistic about the direction of the regulatory environment, but very cautious. It's a pendulum. It's going to swing back and forth. The thing that I think will not be able to be undone, whether it's tokenized deposits or Bitcoin, what we are seeing right now is an integration of digital signature-based assets into the technology stack of commercial banks in particular. And that's something that's not going to be able to be undone. So I think right now the craze is tokenized fiat, but it's the same underlying plumbing that we're going to be able to ride to get Bitcoin integrated more directly into the financial system in the future.
And do you think are any of the rules coming out now, do you think it'll make it harder for that to happen? Or are we kind of still on, at least open, potentially neutral, positive territory where the rules won't stop banks from, Bitcoin banks from building the right kind of a bank, and as opposed to the tokenized fiat route?
I think it's too early to tell. We have the Genius Act, which I think helps provide some clarity around stablecoins and tokenized deposits to some extent. I think I'd like to see things like the ability to actually guarantee the right to hold private keys in future legislation, and it's just too early to tell with that.
We have that in Wyoming.
That's it.
Yeah, we have something like that in Kentucky too.
I got to get out of Washington. That's actually a great segue, Colin. I wanted to kind of follow up with you on, one of the great things about Wyoming and kind of, our structure in the U.S. is that the states can kind of act as a balancing mechanism. And I'm just curious your perspective on, we're having a lot of, more movement at the federal level. Are you concerned at all, or how do you see the state's ability to continue to kind of balance things or protect things like self-custody if we get a lot of federal preemption out of, like the Clarity Act and the implementation of the Genius Act?
So I'm less concerned about the Genius Act. The Clarity is the House bill, and then the Senate bill is the RFIA. There are significant differences. For Bitcoiners, one of those big differences is the RFIA has protections for open source developers. Clarity does not yet. However, there are concerns from some states that both the RFIA and Clarity create more federal preemption in this area than we would like. Some of those issues stem from the sense that that these things, the purveyors, I guess the registered financial advisors who deal in crypto would then be federally regulated, and the states wouldn't get their cut of their licensing fees. Aside from that, though, you've got local control, you've got all of this whole structure built out for how this industry is regulated, and some states are concerned that that both Clarity and RFIA as drafted will upend that apple cart and throw not just these new things, but then anybody who touches this gets taken out of state control. That's concerning to some states. Wyoming less so. I think we have some. We're a bit more familiar with how this stuff works, and we have, in general, a very light regulatory environment. So, and also we've talked with our delegation. We know where some of these things are probably going to land, and that aspect is less concerning. But as to the federal preemption in this space, to some extent, that's actually probably good, because you have Wyoming, where we have a fairly permissive climate, and then you have New York with BitLicense and that. So from my perspective, I love that, because that means people are leaving New York and coming to Wyoming. But from the perspective of the country, that's probably not how it should be. We need to have some, now that this is more of a developed industry, we need some more clarity on how this should work over the entire country.
And I guess sort of similar question from the courts. You've obviously been involved with Custodia and dealing with the courts. They're another kind of balancing mechanism potentially on the legislation at least. How do you, like, my hypothesis going into this new administration was that the courts were going to kind of fight back a little bit on some of the crazier stuff that was going on. And now I sort of worry that if we're getting too permissive, courts might kind of start to pump the brakes instead of pushing back on the administration. What have you seen there?
Well, obviously with the Custodia case, courts are a reactionary system. Like you're not even generally supposed to bring an issue to the courts unless it's actively being litigated between two people. They don't do advisory opinions effectively. So, but in that sense, Caitlin's case was argued in January, and there's still no decision. So they move very slowly in most cases. I mean, obviously you can have emergency rulings and things like that, but most things move very slowly. And so, yes, I think the courts might pump the brakes, but you also have the issue of there's a lot of disagreement in the judiciary, maybe not on this issue, but in lots of issues. So you go to a judge in Texas and you're going to get a completely different answer than you say San Francisco on a lot of things. So that is actually, without the overarching legislation to sort of set the rules that the courts are going to follow, that's actually, I think, a little bit more uncertainty than we need. So the courts in this case, I think, are not providing the level of certainty and haven't provided the level of certainty up to this point. So probably won't do it unless Congress and the executive kind of push them to.
Got it. So still in a bit of a maybe more deferential role now that there's motion happening and that they don't. Yeah, I got the sense some courts are starting to push back on like extra legal, regulators acting outside of their purview. Maybe they're not as concerned about that now. They can comfortably wait a little bit.
So I think you're referring to Loper Bright. That's a huge decision. That's going to have yes, it's going to have huge impacts in our space, but it's a universal decision, all regulatory aspects. That, I think, decision is more important for us for pulling back on the excesses of Gensler's SEC and his penchant for regulation by enforcement when he wouldn't even tell you what the enforcement was. So that needed to go away, and the courts doing that was a positive. On the sort of nitty-gritty level, though, the courts are a little bit more reactionary and a little too slow and a little bit too scattered. I'm not coming up with a good example off the top of my head, but I believe that there's a circuit split in our industry in a couple of different cases, and the Supreme Court hasn't bothered taking up yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Cool. And Dan, so in terms of the more like day-to-day roadblocks or big risks that you're seeing in the clients that you're working with and advising, what are kind of the biggest issues that are still lingering or outstanding or people maybe not thinking about?
Well, looking around this room, many of you have clients, whether you're, wealth planners, financial advisors, RIAs, broker-dealers, accountants, attorneys. Many of you have clients. And it's really, and as we were talking about a little bit earlier today, talking to you guys about following rules is a pretty easy job, right? This is a pretty buttoned up group compared to a lot of the Bitcoin conferences we go to, right? And so and if we're talking about Bitcoin only, when we're talking about sort of broader sort of digital asset world and crypto world, that's probably 80% of staying compliant, essentially. And so it's, but there are things that you would, should do, and sort of customs and habits that you would, should have when you're dealing with your clients. Of course, you've got to remember just sort of day to day, week to week, month to month. You've got to remember your role. And you've got to follow your own rules, of course, naturally. By the way, this is entertainment. This is pure entertainment.
Not legal
So when
advice.
I say things like, never break two laws at the same time, because that's when you get in trouble, that's entertainment. You can have a kilo of dope in your passenger floorboard, or you can run a red light, but you can't do both at the same time. So, entertainment. So when you're working with your clients, it kind of goes without saying, but you got to remember, first of all, understand your role, understand your rules. So if your clients want to be involved with Bitcoin, that's great. Obviously, you have concerns about suitability, right? So a lot of people who have clients now are, there's this thing going around now among even legacy style wealth management people, 2 to 4%. I'm hearing that all the time now. That's fine, and it does kind of make sense to ease people into things from a suitability perspective. And of course, Morgan and others have talked about savings versus investment and so forth. You might want to just document things. You're like, Dan, I know but actually really document things, because sometimes you need to be able to prove things. If your clients are dealing with Bitcoin, especially, depending on your role, you've got to think about qualified custodians. Meeting people at these types of events is great, right? Because you have great companies who have great solutions now for these things. Um, Education, monitoring things. This will keep you compliant. Also, I think you want to, especially if you have a client who's interested in, somewhere along the spectrum and, holding keys or themselves. You want to, and there are companies and vendors that help you with this now and that sort of remind you to do key checks and things. But, you want to keep an eye on your custody setup and do kind of regular checks, whether that be, quarterly or monthly, what have you. This is an interesting period of time, I think, because we've got a Bitcoin price that is, today at least, pretty reasonable, right? If you're in the market for some, and you've got the next, say, 5 or 6, 7, 8 years where, after that, how much Bitcoin is going to be really available, right? Because of the halvings and so forth, and at the same time, we've got, at least in the past year or so, we've got an environment where it seems like a little more open, right, compared to the previous administration. And so you've really got an interesting opportunity to work with your clients. You can both help them get Bitcoin, and I don't just mean shares in an exchange-traded product. I mean actually get Bitcoin. And it's kind of a window of time, right, to get Bitcoin at a somewhat reasonable price while things have kind of opened up. And you're going to really have to do it probably, and this isn't really the topic of this panel, but you're kind of going to have to start doing it, maybe especially with, all your clients have different profiles, but, you've got your sort of earners who are 45 and under, and if you don't do this stuff with them, several years from now, they're going to look at you and be like, why did you miss this, right? And so, you can stay compliant, maybe help them get actual Bitcoin as opposed to just price exposure in this window of time. And there are opportunities to do that. But I would encourage you, one way to make sure you're compliant is to understand Bitcoin yourself, right? Like, have you ever done a transaction, right? Have you ever sent some? Like, yourself. Do you know what it feels like? Do you know what it looks like? Because until you can do it yourself and you get a kind of a better personal feel for it, these things are going to seem a little more abstract. That'll help you stay compliant. So,
Dan, what does it feel like to send Bitcoin?
to send Bitcoin? Well, if I sell my 17-year-old son some Bitcoin, maybe I'll send him some Bitcoin. That feels good.
I mean, I do feel like that was one of the first things that Orange told me was like, this is magic. I pressed a button and it went to someone else without going through any intermediary. I do think, especially, I mean, to the extent people are, I don't know, connecting or in a role where you're educating or interacting with regulators and policymakers who are open-minded, I do think like just walking them through it is really helpful, because once they kind of grok it, I don't know, there's a lot of fundamental legal principles that I think people misapply or could apply differently if they really understood it, and it could create more open-mindedness. So I like the idea of,
If I could say this, then I'll be quiet. With your clients, because it happens to me all the time. Your client comes to you and they're sitting there in the chair, in front of you. And they say, look, my buddy's got this fund, or my buddy's got this thing, right? And it sounds awesome, and it sounds like the returns are going to be great. So this is kind of on the investing versus the saving side, as Morgan pointed out. But it's not Bitcoin, it's something else, right? I mean, pancake, sushi, swap, something, whatever. Don't be careful about having your clients get cute with this stuff, because they conflate crypto and Bitcoin. I don't know when that'll ever end, right? But still, and so that'll avoid many, many, many of your problems if just kind of gently, or not so gently, keeping them away from getting cute with some of this other stuff.
okay, I promised I'd save time for questions. I don't know how much time we have left, but just so we don't run out. Okay, yeah, I think you had your hand up first.
let's box this out with regulation so that we're not disintermediated. Do any of you see things going on right now that give you optimism? Because I see some things, but it's kind of scary to say they're going to try to find a way to either slow this down or, they're not going to stop it, but they're at least cut out the process.
With okay, so a little bit of background. Wyoming has its own stable token now, and I'm not involved. But and with Genius, yes, they're going to try to box things out. I think products like Bitcoin-backed lending and other things will help to bring in the more traditional banking sector because it's easier to seize a Bitcoin than a building. I mean, it's practically easy to seize a building, but you don't know what's going to be in it when you seize it, right? They could have torn it up. I mean, it doesn't matter if somebody drew a Satoshi on your Bitcoin. But the stable tokens, things like Genius, I think that is a bit more concerning to the banks than pure Bitcoin. But as you said, they're not going to be able to stop it. Genius did put some guardrails on it, but depending on how the result of the Custodia lawsuit is, if Custodia is able to get a master account, then you've got a banking institution that is now sitting on all three sides. They have Bitcoin, they have pure fiat, and they have stable token. And I believe theirs are tokenized deposits, not stable token. But and Caitlin gave me a nice little discussion about what that means. But I think that with Genius allowing banks to start to manufacture and create tokenized deposit tokens, that brings them into the field and gets them on the same side in the, say, 3 to 5 year range.
Yeah, I also just think like positive things are like, okay, the SEC has acknowledged that state trust companies can be qualified custodians, and if we have a regime that protects self-custody, like those are good signs. If you start to see, now you can have whatever, Trump is not a security, Trump coin is not a security, we're winning, but self-custody is, illegal. Like keep your eye, I would say like that's kind of incumbent on us as an industry to kind of keep active, even though there might be big headlines that seem positive, there could be more nefarious things happening.
And that's actually what I would be very nervous about. I don't know if many of you follow RFIA and Clarity, but in the Senate, a set of Democrats proposed changes to RFIA that were very anti-self-custody, if not outright outlawing it, basically making it impossible.
Yeah, which is sort of it's interesting because it's probably indicative of the bank lobbyist money, and also illustrative that even though the crypto industry spent hundreds of millions of dollars electing some of the senators, they don't it doesn't get you everything you want necessarily if you're not quite as powerful. I think you also had a question, yeah.
Pack up the station wagon and move.
I think the BIT license is controlled by NYDFS, Department of Financial Services. They're very authoritarian. You can always establish an LLC in another state, such as I don't know, Wyoming.
Hopefully the kind of federal preemption we were talking about could help. Also, if you get more standardization from the federal Congress, it would fix some of that. But DFS, as the people that started the BIT license, built big businesses helping consult with other companies to get through the process. So there's definitely some incentive problems. Yeah, and maybe last question. I guess we have one minute.
It's been a while since I've read them. I think RFIA clarifies that Node Runner and it was not a money transmitter. A miner is not a money transmitter. I don't know about Lightning. There's a ruling by FinCEN that claims that Lightning nodes are money transmitters, but I think they've backed off of that. But we would need better rules there. That's a very long answer. So I'll start to say that maybe, but you probably don't have the bankroll to be the test case.
Yeah, the money transmission stuff, of course, there've been criminal cases in the past, year that have happened. And so, yeah, we'll see. And then you get into, and then if you're just as a little bit edge case, I know we got to go, but then, you get into like fediments, right? And it's like, well, there's not a lot of clarity as far as, and how does Bitcoin scale to 8 billion people without something like fediments? So we'll see.
Keep calling your Congress people. We're not done yet. We gotta keep advocating for the good laws and rules.
You might sum it up just by saying, I think the most concerning thing about clarity is the lack of clarity on this point.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody.